So Pfizer, it seems, has a new vaccine for coronavirus which might well be effective. What does this tell us, and is it important? So it's interesting, I was actually traveling during the period when this news broke. I was actually in the airport, and it was very interesting how markets reacted. The French stock market was up by close to 8% at one stage, and it actually was up by about 7.5% for the day. The US stock market was also up by 3 or 4%, and stock markets in general have gone up a lot in the last few weeks, last month, now that the election and the news on the vaccine has been delivered. Now, what's interesting about this is investors are very likely to go to one extreme or the other. So investors are very likely either to become fearful or greedy. Fear is a much stronger emotion though than greed. So when people do get fearful, it's much more extreme. We saw that in February and March, and to a lesser extent in April. But nevertheless, greed is also a big emotion, even though it's not as big as fear. So when people are feeling optimistic, markets are likely to go up a bit too much. When people are fearful, for sure, markets are likely to go down too much. If you think about it, US markets are almost double what they were during the worst of the coronavirus. But from a long-term investor's perspective, if you looked at it from a medium-term perspective, what happened with the lockdown and shutdown, it wasn't the end of the world. So what I would say is this, is that the long-term investor shouldn't really care too much about these kind of things, because if you've got stocks and bonds in your portfolio, you can always rebalance. And besides that, if you're willing to invest for the long term, it doesn't really matter if the S&P 500 is up or down or sideways the next month or two, or indeed MSCI World or whatever index or investment you're in. It doesn't really matter if you're willing to hold it long term. But the interesting thing is, the vaccine doesn't change that many things from the point of view that, yes, it does change things short term. It looks like we're going to come out of this sooner than expected. Initially, people thought it would go on for a few months, then some people thought a year. But even as recently as a month ago, a lot of people thought coronavirus could go on for another year, 18 months. Now it seems like there's a possibility, at least, that we could get back to, or at least closer to normal in, say, 5, 6, 7, 8 months. But the reality of the situation is this: the coronavirus was never going to go on forever anyway. Whether it was through a vaccine or better treatments, or the mutated, or most people in the world got the virus, it was never going to last forever anyway. It was always going to end where it was 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024 in a very extreme case maybe. But the point is, a long-term investor always knew that this was going to end. And anyway, online companies were always making more money anyway, despite this. So I think speculators are much more likely to get excited or too down on the news, but a long-term investor is much more likely to put things into perspective. So yes, this particular announcement might lead us to getting back to normal. It might lead to markets doing better than expected in the next 6 to 12 months. We don't know. But from a medium to long-term perspective, I don't think the coronavirus has changed that many things, actually. It might just mean that more and more money will go into technology over time, that we've moved to a digital world more aggressively than we would have done. But if you think about it, the world in 2035 or 2036 or whatever, is it really going to be that much different to how it would have been if coronavirus didn't happen? There might be a few changes for sure. I do think the world's pressed the fast forward button on digitalization, doing things online and so on. But these kind of things more affect the short and medium term. Think of 9/11. It was a huge event at the time. It affected travel for a good 5 years after that. I can remember people were really afraid for up to 5 years about going on planes. That doesn't mean that nobody did it. It doesn't mean the flying didn't recover, but it had a scarring effect for about 3 to 5 years after that. And likewise, same with the global financial crisis or all the events we talk about. But when you look at it from a long-term perspective, it doesn't always change as many things as people think.